Hi, this is Dave Maynard, and right now we're going to talk about one of the philosophical areas of proof. This is called the cosmological argument. And before we get started, what I'd like you to do is on your notes, I have a YouTube address, and I'd like you to take a look at the very brief video of the cosmological argument. So please do that beforehand so you'll know a little more of what I'm talking about. Okay, but before we get started, we need to define some terms. Oh joy, definition of terms again. Well, it'll be brief, but it's necessary. The first term is finite, and that is something or someone that has boundaries to it. Something that has a beginning and it has an end to it. Another word is infinite. This is something a lot of people have real trouble with. It is someone or something that doesn't have boundaries. There's no beginning and there's no end to it. I know that can probably really stretch your mind, especially when you think either way that there's no beginning and no end. We can't relate to that, because we live in time. Infinity is represented by a sidewards 8. We'll talk more about infinity as we go along. The next word is the law of causality. And what that says is, for every finite effect, there is a cause other than itself. For example, my pushing you, that's the cause. That'll cause you to fall over. That's the effect. The law of causality is foundational to human thinking. If people are not going to agree to that, give it up, because they're saying they don't really want to listen to you. The law of causality is foundational to anything and everything we do. For every finite effect, there is a cause, and the cause is not in itself. Another concept is the first law of thermodynamics. And what that says is, once the universe has been created, energy, whether it's in the form of energy or in the form of matter, because matter is just a different form of energy, that energy can't be created or destroyed. Now it can change forms, but the total amount of, let's say, matter and energy together in the universe is constant, can't increase and can't decrease. The second law of thermodynamics says this, and this is kind of confusing. The amount of usable energy in the universe is running down. Eventually, if time permits, the universe will all be at the same temperature. And since work for any life process depends on a difference in temperature, no life of any kind would be possible. The universe will have died of what scientists refer to as a heat death. That means everything will be the same temperature. You might hear some people say the second law of thermodynamics says that entropy must always increase. And that's true. Here's the confusing part. As the usable amount of energy goes down, what we define as entropy is the disorganization of a state. So as the usable energy goes down, the actual entropy goes up. Why they did that, I don't know. But this is a law of physics. It is a law that's in a closed system, and it always applies. It's not a theory, it's a law. It has never been observed to be violated at all within a closed system. So as your entropy increases, what that means is the amount of usable energy in your system is running down. Now, since all processes are not 100% efficient, When we set off a nuclear bomb, we're converting the matter, the uranium, let's say, or the plutonium, we're converting part of that to energy. Do you know how much? 2%. That's it. Nuclear energy is one of the most efficient forms of energy we have, and it only converts 2% of the mass to energy. So, in our universe, everything is getting less efficient. And over a long period of time, like billions of years, if the universe were just to be left alone, so to speak, eventually everything would come to the same temperature, because nothing is 100% efficient. So, okay, question. Some people might say, well, why couldn't the universe have always existed? Okay, why couldn't it have? Well, this question wrongly assumes that everything must have a cause. We only claim that everything that had a beginning needs a cause, or every finite thing needs a cause. Did the universe have a beginning? Yeah, the second law of thermodynamics says the universe is running down. Since it's running down, it must have had a starting point that it's running down from. Scientists have also theorized that since our universe is expanding, that at one point it must have all been collapsed down into one little point, and they call that the singularity. That's what the Big Bang theory of the universe is based on, that this one little point of incredible density just expanded outwards, and some of that energy eventually turned into matter, and that matter turned into galaxies, and that's where we come from. But that means the universe is running down. What that means is the universe had a beginning. Ouch. Scientists don't like to deal with the beginning, and I'll tell you why in a minute. A second thing is math, and that is an infinite time, as in the universe always existing, an infinite time can never be traversed. Okay, what do I mean by that? Infinity in the past means there is no beginning to time. So no matter how many days there were in the past, you would have never reached today. Well, yeah, you would if you just went forward one day at a time. No, because it's infinitely in the past. So you never would have reached today, because there would have been an infinity of time in the past. But since we have reached today, time had to have a beginning. So the universe could not have always existed. A third reason is just a logical reason, and that is, since nothing can cause itself, the universe must have been caused by something else. And we'll get into some of those theories a little bit later. Okay, now let's look at the classical or the philosophical arguments for God's existence. The cosmological argument, or the argument from creation, states this: every finite thing must have a beginning. Every finite thing was caused by something else. That's the law of causality. And then, if you go back far enough as to what caused this or what caused that, you got to come to a point at which you can't go any further, because again, you can't keep going infinitely back. That's called an infinite regression, and while we can talk about that in theory, it doesn't exist in reality. So you finally get back to this first uncaused cause of everything that has ever existed. Now some people might say, well, what caused that? Okay, well then you haven't gone back far enough. You just go back further. And eventually you're going to get to this first uncaused cause. a couple things to point out about that. The second part is the law of causality again, and I mentioned that's a fundamental principle of science. Without that, science is impossible. Honestly, to deny that law is not to be rational. And if somebody is denying that law, what that is telling you is they're not going to give you a rational conversation, so you might as well just leave the conversation. Now, when you apply this cosmological argument to the creation of the universe, you eventually get back to whatever caused the universe. We're not saying what it is at this point. Whatever it is the first uncaused cause. Whatever caused the universe, that's outside of our realm of observation and scientific knowledge. We can't observe it. We can't measure it. We can't repeat. I mean, we can't see anything. We can't even see all of our own universe yet. So we don't know what caused it. We can't observe it. Rather than say all the time what about this first uncaused cause, because that's kind of a bulky term, philosophers have gave it a name. God. Now at this point, we're not saying it's the God of the Bible. We're not saying it's the God of any religion. Hey, it's easier to say God than to say the first uncaused cause. People will ask, okay, well then who made God? I mean, if they say, how did the universe come into existence? And we say, well, God made it, which is not the best answer to give, just because of all the things I've said previously. They can say, okay, well, who made God? No one. He wasn't made. He's always existed. Remember, only finite things are made, or only things that are made need a maker. Only things that have a beginning need a beginner. So it's really a category mistake to ask who made God. It's a logical impossibility. It'd be like saying, well, who made the unmade? Whoa. Or it's like asking, who's the bachelor's wife? Well, somebody might say, well, but bachelors don't have wives. And then you can say, okay, God wasn't made. Question, did God create himself? Again, only finite things need to be created. So this leaves us with three choices. One, he is self-created. In other words, he created himself. That's irrational. Nothing can create itself. Number two, he was caused or created by another, but then you just haven't gone back far enough. Only finite things are created. Number three, he's uncaused. God must be uncaused. Even if we can't understand it, that's where all this is leading to. He must be uncaused. Question. Can God make a mountain so big he can't move it? Again, believe it or not, this is a question people will ask you. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to stump you. They're trying to get you to realize, oh yeah, I guess my point doesn't make any sense. Again, it's just another category mistake. It's like what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object. Or is there something more than infinite? No, there's not. If you add 1 to infinity, what do you get? You get infinity. You can add 100 to infinity, and you'll still get infinity. Or it's like asking, who's the bachelor's wife? These are suicide questions. They have their own destruction built right into them. They're logical impossibilities. I call them hiccups of the English language. They're self-contradictory questions that cannot be answered because of the way they were asked. Question. Is there only one God? Well, if you define God as unlimited, I mean, let's face it, if he made the universe, if he created the universe, I would say he's unlimited. How do you have two unlimited beings? You don't know the limits of where one stops and the other starts. So, in reality, there can only be one unlimited being. Now, let's spin this out. Since he caused everything else, since he created the universe, let's face it, you got to be pretty powerful to create our universe. In terms of our thinking, he's unlimited in power. The word for that is omnipotent. Since he created time also, obviously he can exist outside of time. Another way of saying that is he's eternal. Since he created all the space, again, he can exist outside of all that space. I mean, before he created it, God, being the first uncaused cause, was still there. But since he existed outside of space or inside of space, either one, he's omnipresent. That means he can be anywhere at any time. And since he made the universe with all of its laws, which we're only beginning to understand, I would say he's pretty knowledgeable. And the word for that is omniscient. Since his creatures, us humans, have morals, he then would be the ultimate moral being. Morals don't just come out of nowhere. So we can say that this first uncaused cause, or God, is omnipresent, eternal, omniscient, omnipotent, and moral. Okay, so what? Is this the God of the Bible? The Bible says that God is eternal. Colossians chapter 1 verse 17 and Hebrews chapter 1 verse 2. It says he is omnipresent. 1 Kings chapter 8 verse 27 and Isaiah chapter 66 verse 1. It says that God is all good. There's no evil in him. He's all good. He's moral. Psalm 86 verse 5 and Luke 18 verse 19. He's omnipotent. He's all-powerful. Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3 and Matthew chapter 19 verse 26. And he knows everything. He's omniscient. 1 John chapter 3 verse 20, the Gospel of John chapter 21 verse 17, and Hebrews chapter 4 verse 13. So is this God, is he describable as the Christian God? Yeah, I think he is. If you look at a lot of the other gods and a lot of the other religions, you'll find out that most of them are not personal gods. And since God created humans and we have personality, then God would have to have personality. Most of them are its. It's not a he or a she, it's an it. A lot of them are not, they don't exist outside the universe. They are part of the universe, or the universe is them, like, well, God is in this tree, God is in the mountain, God is in this table, that sort of thing. So I think we can, once you compare all that, I think we can say that the definition of the Christian God happens to match up with the definition of this first uncaused cause in our universe with all of the attributes of that God. I've also listed some reference books for you in your notes, and I've also listed a reference website. So we'll see you at the next session. Bye-bye.